is from Dr. Arima Dia Setiawati MSc from Universitas Gajah Mada that is attending on site in this room. May we give applause to Dr. Arima? The lecture topic is about sustainable food processing and green technology. This session will be led by Dr. Ina Sandi Pandanwangi as the moderator, a lecturer from the Department of Food and Agricultural Product Technology, Universitas Gajah Mada. Let's begin this session by getting to know our moderator through a brief look at her academic and professional background. Dr. Ina Santi Pandanwangi is a lecturer from Department of Food and Agricultural Product Technology, Universitas Gajah Mada. She has strong background in food reaction engineering and waste to energy in food system. She completed her doctoral studies at Universitas Gajah Mada, where she developed expertise in reaction kinetics, high shear processing, and sustainable resource utilization within food and agricultural system. She had led and contributed to various research projects and publications related to municipal solid waste valorization, reaction engineering for lipid modification, and sustainable processing technologies. Her recent work includes studies on waste to energy potential in Yogyakarta and advanced glycerolysis interesterification reactions using high shear reactors. Without further ado, Dr. Ina Santi Pandanwangi, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, MC, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, for the online and on-site participants. I hope everyone is still excited to be in this class, yeah. For online participants, can you hear my voice clearly? Okay, okay. Okay, before I start today's class, I would like to introduce myself again. My name is Ina Santi Pandanwangi, and you can call me Inas. And I will be the moderator for the session. As mentioned by the MC, I am the lecturer in the Food and Agriculture Product Technology, Universitas Gajah Mada. I would like to introduce our speaker for this session. So our speaker is Dr. Arima Dia Setiawati from Universitas Gajah Mada. Okay, and I will read her CV. So she is a lecturer in the Food and Agriculture Product Technology, same as me, in Universitas Gajah Mada. And she completed her PhD in Ghent University in Belgium. Her research areas include encapsulation, whey protein cluster, food colloid, and emulsion. And some of her publications are the quality parameters of dried seaweed, challenges and future directions, and then development of red palm oil-based gels to modify the fat phase of chocolate spreads, and then the ultrasound-assisted extraction of beta-cyanine from dragon fruit for sustainable natural colorant production. Also, the physicochemical and functional properties of jackfruit seed, starch nanoparticles obtained via ultrasonication-assisted precipitation. Okay. And then I would like to welcome Dr. Arima. Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Arima. How are you? Okay, I hope you're in a good condition. Yeah. Okay. Before I start, I like to thank you for taking your time to be in today's speaker. I'm very glad that you can join us in this afternoon. So Dr. Arima will give some lectures. The title is about sustainable food processing and green technology. Okay, the presentation will run about 70 minutes, and then following the discussion will run about 35 minutes. Okay, without further ado, to Dr. Arima, you may start the presentation.
Thank you. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore. Thank you, first of all, for joining me here. So I will be the speaker for this last sessions. I know it's a very critical time, having your lunch, and you probably already very tired, so you must be sleepy. You want to go home, but please bear with me for at least 60 to 7 minutes, or perhaps shorter. Okay. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much also for the nice introduction by Dr. Inasanti. So I would like to introduce myself once more. My name is Arima, and I'm from the same department as Bu Inas, Department of Food and Agricultural Product Product Technology. I forgot the name of my own department. Okay, but I specifically comes from the Laboratory of Chemistry and Biochemistry of Food and Agricultural Products. So before starting the lecture, the presentation, at first when I was invited, the committee asked me to give lecture on green and sustainable processing of food. But food itself is very broad area. So I was thinking to narrow it down into protein. So my lecture today will be focusing on the green and sustainable technology processing of food protein, starting from the sources to techno-functionality and application. And also, I was informed that the participant here, you have all various background, not everyone coming from the food science area, right? Yeah, okay. So I have tried my best to make my presentation as general as possible so that it will be easier for you to understand the message of the message that I'm trying to convey to you during my lecture. So I hope you can follow the presentation easily. Next, oh, sorry. So we're going to talk about protein, and I will start with the very big picture or the general introduction of proteins. As we all know that food is actually the basic human needs. So we consume food, you had your lunch, and you want to get energy from it. However, consuming food is much more complicated than that. It's more than having an energy from your food. You consume food to get macro and micronutrients, right? Micronutrients such as protein, carbohydrates, lipids, and then water, and then you have micronutrients such as vitamin and mineral. And as its name, micronutrients, you need it only in a small amount. However, if you fail to meet the requirement of these micronutrients, it will influence how your body function. It can also influence your health. It's the same as micronutrients. For macronutrients, all these components, they have specific requirement. For carbohydrates, fat, protein, water, there is a certain requirement that your body must meet. And for protein, let's say, for example, protein does not only contribute to your energy, but protein has other functions such as building and repairing body tissues essential for growth and muscle development. And in my further slide, I will be focusing on that aspect. Yeah, as I mentioned before, protein contribute to your energy. For 1 gram, it can contribute to 4 kilocalorie. But if we are talking about protein, we have functionality, 2 aspects of functionality that we have to discuss. If we talk about functionality with someone who has background in nutrition or who study nutrition, the word functionality normally they link it into health functionality, health related functionality. But in food science, functionality is not always related to health, but it's also related to technological function, or sometimes we call it techno-functional. And in protein, you have these 2 aspects. You have health functionality and you have also technological functionality, or we call it techno-functional. The techno-functionality of the protein, normally it is related to how your protein behaves on your food product. For example, what did you have for lunch? Chicken and cassava? Cassava leaves. Oh, cassava leaves. Lotte, chayot. Oh, chayot. Okay. So you have chicken as your source of protein, right? So you can also actually you can transform your chicken into meatball, into a chicken sausage, right? But how your chicken protein behaves on sausage, on meatball, they are all really depends or affected by the techno-functionality of the chicken protein. You might just see it as a flesh of chicken, but inside there's actually a complex structure of protein that has different amino acid composition, different structure, which then will have different techno-functionality and it will behave differently in different types of products. So for protein, I will talk about techno-functionality again later in the further slides, in application slides. So for proteins, we have three groups of protein source that we know. Normally, we have animal protein source, chicken that you just had for lunch, and then beef, meat, you have fish, you have milk derivative proteins such as casein, whey protein, they are all actually part of milk protein. You have vegetable plant protein, for example, rice. Yes, rice is a source of protein as well. And you have chickpeas, lentil, soy, oat, and other plant proteins. And in the third group, we have algae and edible insect sources. Anyone tried it? This edible insect, you tried? You like it? Okay. Seaweed, yeah, seaweed tastes very nice. Worm? Yeah. Super warm. And how do you like it? Crunchy, okay. Well, while you are in Jogja, you can actually go to Gunung Kidul. It's in the east part of Jogja. And on the way, you will see a lot of people selling this edible insect. But if you have allergy, don't ever try it. Yeah, but it tastes interesting. They fried the grasshopper, yeah. They fried the grasshopper, they put some seasoning. It actually tastes quite interesting, yeah. Although they just fry it as it is, so you will still see the shape of the grasshopper. It's intact grasshopper. Okay, so we're coming to the evolution of protein sources. Sorry. If we talk about green technology and sustainability, we will also dealing with the increase of population. So there is a rising of global population, which is expected to reach 9.7 billion by 2050. And with increasing this population, it means that we need to provide more food to feed the whole population. So in this aspect, it is expected that the production or food production must increase by 50% by 2050. So there's a lot of hard work to do for those who work in the agriculture sector because the productivity should increase by 50% by 2050. It's a big amount. And if we talk about protein, the animal protein production, based on the research, it accounts for 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emission and utilizing 77% of agricultural land while providing only 80% of global calorie supply and 30% only of protein supply. And thus, now we need a more sustainable source of protein with high yield that we can consume or we can produce in a big amount, big scale to meet the demand of protein in the future, to feed the whole population. So before I go to the source of protein, sustainable source of protein, first of all, we have to differentiate first. We have to understand the difference between animal protein and also plant protein. For animal proteins, animal protein is very superior actually. It is very easy to be digested because somehow this animal protein has secondary structure that is easily to be digested by the enzyme. And also the amino acid composition, as well as the biological value, protein digestibility, and so on, they are actually superior compared to plant protein. However, the animal protein itself, the production has been linked to a source of increased carbon footprint, and a lot of report saying that animal protein production actually have a big impact on environment. So for an alternative of animal protein, we have plant protein. Plant protein actually is not as bad as what we think. It has good amino acid profile. Most of them, they have good amount of essential amino acid. So if we talk about essential amino acid, it means that your body cannot provide essential amino acid, or you cannot form essential amino acid in your body. Meaning you have to provide your body with essential amino acid from outside by consuming food, for example. So the plant protein itself already has a good properties, but not properties, yeah, quality, not quality, quantity, sorry. So the plant protein itself, it's already present in plant. They have high amount of protein. But once again, if we talk about protein, we don't talk about only the quantity, but also the quality. If you have high amount of protein, but your quality is very low, it also will not give you a good benefit for your body. The plant protein itself, the problem is that it has very low digestibility. Some of them has low digestibility. Why? Because there's fiber. In other area, if we study carbohydrate, fiber is good for your body. But if you talk about protein source, fiber might hinder the digestibility of your protein. And thus, it decrease the absorption of the protein by your body. And beside fiber, the problem also comes from the antinutrient. So some of the plant protein, they contain antinutrient, which can also hinder the digestibility of your protein. However, don't worry. So it's not always meaning that your plant protein is bad. There's a way to improve the quality of your plant protein. So you can perform some processing to improve the quality of your protein. If you just eat it like that, yes, perhaps you get high amount of protein, but lower absorption by your body because the digestibility is low. But if you perform some processing, such as extraction, modification, then you can increase the digestibility of your protein. So processing is a way to improve the quality of your protein. And also one more thing that I have to mention, because we're talking about sustainability, the plant protein has been reported that it has lower environmental impact than the animal protein. So the first alternative protein that is considered to be sustainable is plant-based protein. So plant-based protein, you can get it from legumes such as soy protein, soybean, peas, peanuts, coconut, and other plants. And then you can have proteins from cereals such as wheat and rice. And those two commodities, they are actually a staple. They contain high amount of carbohydrate, so they can provide you a good amount of carbohydrate and protein at the same time. And actually, there is an interesting fact when, like a long time ago, a few years ago, I checked the data of protein intake in Indonesia. And long time ago, apparently, the protein intake in Indonesia was very, very low, very, very low. And you know that the protein intake of Indonesian people mostly came from rice. That shows how low the protein intake in Indonesia from animal and other source of protein. And which also long time ago, it was linked with the prevalence of stunting in Indonesia, which was high long time ago, but nowadays there's improvement. So there's growing interest in different types of protein. Also, the prevalence of stunting now is getting lower and lower, which relate to the one of them. There are a lot of factors that affecting the stunting, but one of them is the consumption of protein, the intake of protein. So for plant-based protein, there are already commercially available plant-based protein in the market, such as soy protein, pea protein. They can be found in the market, but also some products can be found made with soybean protein and also pea protein, such as this texturized vegetable protein. This is vegan cheese, and also this is texturized vegetable soy protein that made from soybean, yeah, to give a texture like chicken, yeah. And another source of protein that is sustainable is from side streams and upcycling. A good example of this protein source is whey protein. Everyone knows whey protein. I think whey, yes, right? Especially those going to gym to build muscle, right? So whey proteins actually it is obtained from the byproduct of cheese manufacturing. So if you make cheese, you actually create a curd which is mainly contain casein. So you only want to get the casein. You get curd and then you remove the excessive water and you just throw it as a waste. But in fact, inside this water, there are still a lot of protein. We call it whey protein. And then they separate the protein using ultrafiltration or other techniques depending on the purity that you want, and then followed by drying, then you get whey protein powder. In the market, you see different grade of whey protein, right? Concentrate one, isolate one, and the expensive one is the isolate one. Isolate one normally is most expensive. And the side stream and upcycling technique, we can also apply it for other commodities. For example, if you have soybean oil companies that produce soybean oil, of course, they will normally also generate byproduct, which is a soybean cake, right? The soybean cake has very low amount of oil, but the protein content is very high. And this is also a potential for protein production in the future, because this activity actually, besides it's environmentally friendly, they also support the circular economy because you transform waste into a valuable product. And there is also emerging source, microalgae. Microalgae, it's now getting popular as a source of protein, especially, for example, spirulina plantasis. Anyone tried spirulina? Yeah? Yeah, do you like it? It's normal? Uh, do you try it in a big amount or just a small amount? Okay, small amount mixed in drink, yeah. This spirulina plantasis, now it's getting famous because it's also called a superfood because of its macro and micronutrient content. So the protein content in spirulina can be up to 50%. So it's actually very high. So you can just consume it like that, put it in your food product, or you can also process it into something else. For example, protein isolate, that's also possible. However, for those who already tried spirulina and smell it, you might, right? Do you recognize the distinct odor and flavor of the spirulina? Some describe it as fishy, sulfuric, musty aroma and flavor. Yeah. So actually, for microalgae spirulina, it getting more famous. But the problem is, if you put it in your food in high amount, then it will change the flavor and the aroma of your food. Yeah. So there should be a way to overcome this problem. And other future protein sources. Anyone try mycoprotein? Right? Mycoprotein, I think a mycoprotein in Europe, I found it quite easily in the supermarket, right? Mycoprotein is actually protein that you obtain from fungi. Yeah, no, for fungi, mushroom is a bigger one, but fungi is like the smaller one, the filamentous fungi type, yeah. In our faculty, there is research that is performed by my colleague. She's producing this mycoprotein using Rhizopus. I don't remember the name of the fungi. The one that we, Rhizopus aurizae, the one that we put in our tempeh. Yeah, you know tempeh, right? Tempeh, you have those. You like it? Wow, tempeh is very good source of protein, and also because in tempeh you already fermented with fungi, so actually the protein has been broken down into a smaller molecular weight of protein, and it has bioactivity, antioxidant and other bioactivity. So it's very helpful for your body, but also depends on the way you process it. If you fry it with very big amount of oil, then yeah, okay, yeah. So you see the white mass in tempe. So my colleague actually grow the fungi in the water, and she collect just the white mass, and then she did some processing to transform it into meat analog. And it is completely safe because you even eat the fungi in tempeh, so it's safe. And this microprotein, it requires less time to produce the protein. However, there still needs work to be done to improve the yield of the microprotein production. So it's sustainable, environmentally friendly, but sadly, the yield is still quite low, so it still need to be improved. But in Europe, I found this vegetarian product. If I remember correctly, the brand is corn, and it's made from mycoprotein. Maybe in the future, if you can check in the supermarket around you, or if you travel somewhere, you can check vegetarian and vegan product. And we have again edible insect. Edible insect, according to some research, it is sustainable because it requires a fraction of the feed, water, and space needed for conventional meat production. However, the issue with edible insect is the allergenicity. Not everyone can eat insect. So there's still this aspect that need to be thinking about and solve in the future. Are you familiar with this? Yes, lab-grown meat or cultivated meat production. So you actually obtain your meat not from the real cows. I mean, you're not growing the cows, but you get it from the lab. So normally the process involves sampling of muscle tissues and then extracted them, and then you grow them in nutritious media, and then you transfer them into a bioreactor in which you can form the muscle or the structure. And then you get the product, you can process it into different types of product, into meat, into sausage, into nugget, everything, anything. And this lab-grown meat is actually, the yield is very high. You use bioreactor, you grow it in the lab, you don't need like wide area of land to grow your animal. You just need to be in the lab, you use bioreactor, you grow the culture, and then you get your protein. However, if we talk about the acceptability by the consumer, this lab-grown meat has two aspects that needs to be considered. First of all, the ethical questions and religious aspect. Especially if you want to market the product in the Muslim countries, for example, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Middle East, Asia, there will always be question about whether is it halal or haram. And as far as I know, this aspect is still not solved yet up to now. So even though the productivity is very high, but there are these two questions that needs to be answered first before it can be widely accepted by consumer. Okay, there was short information about source of protein, and we're going to discuss the processing and application. So you have your resource, you have your protein, you can consume it as it is. For example, you have peas, you can just put it in your salad, in your meal. You can process it, or you can just boil it, or you can turn it into anything. And then you have soybean, you can just boil it and eat it like that, or you can convert it into a protein powder. So actually the demand of this sustainable alternative protein is increasing. It is actually also because the demand of vegetarian and vegan product now is increasing, and more people are currently practicing vegetarian and vegan lifestyle. There are more and more people practicing this lifestyle. And regarding the techno-functionality of the protein, there's also a high demand or increasing demand of clean label food product. A clean label food product doesn't mean that your food product doesn't have any label, no. But clean label food product meaning that consumer now wants to have their food contain minimum amount of synthetic food ingredient. They want to have anything natural, natural emulsifier, natural coloring agent, anything that is natural. So the demand of it is now getting high and high. And protein can act in technological function aspect. They can act as emulsifier, even coloring agent. They can do everything actually. Oh, I like protein. They can do everything. Yeah. So because the demand of these types of product, the vegan, vegetarian, and also the demand of clean label food product, protein, the demand of the protein, alternative protein is also increasing. So protein itself, if we talk about the application of protein, protein has a lot of roles. Think about your yogurt. You know, yeah, of course, everyone knows yogurt, yeah. You know the set yogurt or the stirred yogurt? We have two types of yogurt, right? The set yogurt, the one that looks like a pudding, right? And you have the stirred yogurt, the one that looks very viscous, yeah? With the set yogurt, it looks very flat, and then if you want to eat it, you normally need a spoon. So it will create a fraction. You will see like a broken fraction of your yogurt that is set yogurt. And to have those properties, you need a good amount of protein, also good quality of protein. What happens if you don't have a good quality of protein? You will see a lot of water on the surface of your yogurt. Have you ever noticed? Yeah, that's actually called syneresis. So the water inside your yogurt, they escape from the matrix of the yogurt. That is because the matrix of your protein in your yogurt is not good. They are not strong enough to trap the water. So in this aspect, protein, they contribute to the mouthfeel, the texture of your food product. And also one more example is sausage and meatball. Sausage and meatball, if you eat sausage and meatball, you expect it to be juicy, right? Juicy and then elastis, chewy, springy, yeah, they are all actually different. In food science, elasticity, chewy, springiness, they all have different aspect. But you know what I mean, right? It's, it should be, in Indonesia, we said mambal. But yeah, it's somewhere between springy, chewy, elastis. To get those properties, again, you need not only high amount of protein, but you need your protein to be soluble and create strong gel. So actually, when you eat sausage and meatball, you actually eat gel of protein. So it actually coming, if you want to get properties, you need protein that can form a strong gel that can hold a lot of water, that can hold oil, because otherwise your sausage meatball will be very soft, and that's not what you want. Unless you want to make this IKEA style meatball, then it has different texture. Yeah. The meatball that I was talking about is the Indonesian style or the Chinese style meatball, the one that is firm but chewy. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah. So this aspect, how your protein works to develop the texture, the appearance, the mouthfeel of your food product is highly related to this technological function of protein. So you see that protein has a lot of techno functionality. That's why the demand for protein is getting higher and higher. Yeah, you can either consume your protein source, your soybean, your peas like that, or if you want to improve the application or to widen or broaden the application of your protein, you can transform it into protein flour. We have 3 grades of protein. The lowest one is protein flour. Protein flour is produced by simply transforming your source into a dry powder. For example, if you have soybean cake, byproduct from the soybean oil production, you can just dry it and then grind it, and then you get this soybean flour. However, the concentration of the protein will be quite low. Sometimes it's below 35%. You can use it into food. Can you use it for food? For example, in noodle, in cookies, yeah, you can have it, you can use it, but you will get a small amount of protein only by using this flour. Or you can perform a processing such as extraction to increase the purity of your protein. By performing extraction, you can get two types of product. You get your protein concentrate, you have your protein isolate. For protein concentrate, the concentration of the protein normally range from 40 to 90%, while for isolate, you have your protein content should be at least 90%. Below 90%, you should call it concentrate. And what about the price? The higher the protein content, the higher the purity, the more expensive of your protein. So if you want to gain more profit, then you can make a protein isolate. You can check in e-commerce the price of whey protein. Normally they have different number, right? Whey, WPI 90, WPI something that shows the protein content of the powder. And the higher the protein content, normally the price will be more expensive. So by performing or by making this powder, you can actually use this protein in various type of product. You can use it for beverages, you can use it for food. So the application will be even more wider. And how do you do the extraction? Yeah, so like other technology, there are conventional technology and also novel technology, the green one, the more sustainable technology one. With protein extraction, the problem with traditional method is that normally sometimes, yeah, most of the time they use a solvent such as hexane, and then they use strong acid and bases and high heat processing. And this condition is very harsh for protein. So sometimes it resulted in a protein with quite poor quality of protein. So researchers now propose modern green tools such as using ultrasound, using microwave, using high pressure homogenizer to assist with the extraction of protein. This technology, by using this technology, you use less solvent and then you require less time to extract your protein. And there's a lot of research growing in utilizing these techniques to extract protein. However, if we talk about extraction of protein, we should remember, we care not only about the number, but also the quality of the protein. So we don't want to, by performing the extraction, we should choose the correct technique, because otherwise it will just degrade your protein. You will not get protein with improved or with good functionality, but probably even poor and lower functionality, which then you cannot use. These are tables that compare the conventional method and novel green techniques. The conventional method for protein extraction, normally some of them are aqueous, alkali, solvent, detergent extraction technique. And then for the novel green technologies, normally they utilize microwave, ultrasound, high pressure, and even enzyme assisted. So they utilize enzyme to help breaking down the matrix to release the protein. That way we will get higher amount of protein. And the novel or green technique, the report always say that the yield using this novel or green technique is normally higher, much higher than the conventional technique. This is some of the extraction method that has been performed for extracting protein, plant protein, from soy protein to watermelon protein. Watermelon protein is not from the flesh of the watermelon, eh? It's from the watermelon seed. Yeah, the seed. They collect the seed and then they extract the protein. Yeah, because of the increase in population, we try to extract everything around us. Yeah, but the watermelon seed, it has also good amount of protein that can be extracted, because also it's a waste, right? Normally when you eat watermelon, you throw away the waste. But to get a big amount of watermelon seed, you need also to have a good source. You can collaborate with a company, you can get the seed, and then you process it or you extract it into some different types of food ingredients, like protein, for example. That was the extraction. So extraction, just a short information about extraction. You can extract your protein using both conventional and also novel technology, which has been reported to be more sustainable because it consumes less energy, using less solvent, and also the time required to extract your protein is much shorter, with much higher yield. But there's a drawback on that. We will talk about it in the last slide. And after extraction, I mentioned before that the focus on the extraction is not only on the number, but also the quality of your protein. But what if you perform your extraction with the best condition? You use green technology, microwave assisted, ultrasound assisted extraction, but still your protein won't work properly. You try to put it into sausage, into meatball, into bread, into noodle, but it just doesn't give the desired properties. What will you do? Modification. So you don't need to throw it away. You need to do some modification. The problem with an alternative protein sometimes comes from the techno functionality. They are high in number. You extract it with the best method, but still, when you want to use it as a food ingredient, it doesn't work well. Then, at that case, you need to perform some modification. So, before starting the modification technique, this picture actually give you an idea, the concept of techno functionality. So it shows the transformation of protein powder into food product. If we want to create food using protein powder, first of all, you have protein powder, and then you want to get protein dispersion. To get this protein dispersion, you need to have your protein highly soluble. So the protein itself first to be highly soluble in water. And then after obtaining the dispersion, you can convert it or transform it into colloidal structure using specific techniques, processing techniques. It depends on the type of the product that you want to make. And then from the colloidal structure, you will get your product. For example, there is gelation. If your colloidal structure is gel, then your type of product probably yogurt, probably sausage, meatball, and so on. And if you have a colloidal structure with emulsion in the emulsion system, then your type of product probably mayonnaise and emulsion, or high protein drink, that's also an emulsion. So you convert your protein product to protein dispersion first, and then you convert it into colloidal structure, and this colloidal structure will give you the desirable properties of your food product. And transformation or this process actually require a good techno-functionality of the protein. Your protein must be soluble. They should have good emulsifying activity. They should be able to hold water, to hold oil, and so on. So why modify proteins? As I mentioned before, it's a complex process to transform protein powder into a food product. And normally, the problem with sustainable protein is the low solubility and poor heat stability. Protein is very easily denatured and aggregated. For those who might not familiar with the concept, think about when you are frying an eggs, right? You crack your eggs open, and then you put it in a pan, and then you apply heat. Oh no, you put your heat on first. You put your pan, and once it's hot, you crack open your eggs, right? And then when you open your eggs, you crack your eggs, it's normally liquid, right? Runny liquid, right? When it's raw. And then once the heat comes to the eggs, it will be converted into a semi-solid white gel, right? So from transparent, you will get a gel with white color. That's actually a phenomena of denaturation and aggregation. So your protein is in its native form. You apply some heat, it will transform into a gel, a white gel. So actually when you eat sunny side up eggs, you actually also eat a gel of protein. So later on, tomorrow morning, if you have a breakfast with eggs, you will think about it. Oh, this is gel of protein. Yeah. So the problem with protein, if you want to apply it in industry, you should have high heat stability. For example, if you want to create a high protein beverage and you want to use protein, alternative protein, plant protein as your emulsifier. For beverage, normally we involve high heat treatment, right? Pasteurization, sterilization. If you use protein that has very low heat stability, your product, it should be liquid because it's beverage. So you pasteurize, you sterilize your beverage, and then when you finish your sterilization and pasteurization, it will transform into a pudding, not a liquid anymore. That is because your protein that you use as emulsifier transform from liquid into an aggregate, protein aggregate. That change the consistency of your food product from liquid to a solid one. There are different way to modify protein. You can modify it using chemical modification, physical modification, enzymatic modification. Which one do I have to use? It depends on your purpose. I will go through it one by one. Might be look complicated, but I'll just explain it in a simple way. So the chemical modification, the one method that can be done and considered to be sustainable, to be green technology, is performing glycation. Glycation is linking your protein to carbohydrates. Carbohydrate can be anything. You can use sugar, you can use polysaccharide, you can use anything that has free carbonyl group. In food chemistry, this reaction occur through Maillard reaction. So you have free amino group of your protein, you have free carbonyl group of your carbohydrate. They will link together through covalent bond, and then you will have this new molecule that consists of your protein and carbohydrate. And because of the presence of this carbohydrate, you somehow improve the solubility of your protein because carbohydrate is soluble in water, right? So it makes your protein to be highly soluble. If your protein highly soluble, then normally, theoretically, it will also improve the technofunctionality of protein because in some literature it is mentioned that the general rule of thumb for protein to have good functionality is that first of all, it should be highly soluble in water. Once it is highly soluble, then normally everything else will follow. So it's something that you can consider when you are choosing method to improve the functionality of your protein. And this technique nowadays, researchers trying to make the techniques to be even more green, more sustainable by applying microwave and ultrasound. Yeah, so microwave and ultrasound can be used not only for extraction, but modification as well. In the previous slide, I mentioned about ultrasound assisted extraction. In the modification, especially in the glycation, not glycation, yeah. In glycation, we will call it as ultrasound assisted glycation process. Yeah, so this method, ultrasound, microwave, pulse electric, and so on, they are now getting even more famous because they can shorten the time that we need to react the protein and also the polysaccharide. This is one aspect. We have also acylation. Acylation, maybe acylated protein, you're not very familiar, but if you check your food ingredients, sometimes you will see modified starch. Modified starch is normally starch which is modified through acylation. But if we modify protein using this technique, sadly, unfortunately, this cannot be used for clean label food product because it uses chemicals. And normally the process is quite harsh, so it's not good anymore if you want to put it in a clean label food product. Physical modification can be done by, again, ultrasound, microwave, everywhere. Everywhere is ultrasound, everywhere is microwave. Yeah. That's why in my lab currently the ultrasound and the microwaves, they are very busy because now everything, we want to make it faster, we want to make it more efficient by using these techniques. So you can modify your protein physically with ultrasound, microwave, or high pressure homogenizer. So by performing this physical modification, you actually affecting the structure of your protein. You can make your protein to be unfolded, and then the structure will change. And then by changing the structure, it will affect the performance of your protein in food products. There are different options on it. I will go a bit faster because there are still I still need to explain or to show you example on the maximizing the utilization of alternative protein. And last modification, not last slide, last modification is using enzymatic modification. Actually, traditionally, we have performed it. When we make tempeh, as I mentioned before, we actually hydrolyze the protein of the soybean using a fungi. But besides using fungi or other microbes, we can also perform hydrolysis using enzyme in a control condition. What you get from the hydrolysis is hydrolysates, which has, well, actually, when you perform hydrolysis, you get peptides. And this peptide has lower molecular weight than the intact protein. And this peptide, most of them, depends on the type of the enzyme in the process. Normally, they have bioactivity. A lot of report has mentioned that peptide from protein, they have antioxidant, high antioxidant activity, anti-diabetic, anti-inflammation, and so on. So, but it depends on the process on how you prepare the hydrolysis. And also, if you use umamizyme, for example, I don't know if someone already ever heard about this. With the umamizyme, you can actually hydrolyze your protein, and then you will get a peptide that can act as flavor enhancer. So you can put it in your food, and it has this umami flavor that can enhance the flavor of your food. Yeah. So it's also possible for future application, creating a flavor enhancer for different types of alternative proteins. Once you get your proteins or you get your modified protein, you can transform it into different types of food product. You can make plant-based meat, you can make a yogurt or vegan yogurt. Anyone ever tried vegan yogurt with coconut milk, right? Do you like the taste? Because it's very coconutty, yeah, it's made with coconut, yeah. But I like it, but some people, they just don't like the flavor of coconut, but actually the yogurt one is very interesting. It's very nice, the flavor. And you can also have the protein. It doesn't always have to be a vegetarian or vegan product. You can put it in meatball, sausage, and noodle, bread, and so on. So you can create different types of product using different types of processing techniques. You have extrusion. If you want to make meat analog or texturized vegetable protein, you normally perform it using extrusion, shearing, or sometimes we call it spinning, a spinning method. And spinning method, you actually create like a fiber of protein, and then you stick them together, then it will give you a fiber that looks like a chicken fiber. And then you will get a chicken analog, for example, like that. Or you can also perform fermentation, pasteurization, and so on.
Okay, excuse me, Dr. Arima, you have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, close. We are close to the end of the presentation. So I will show you the case study of how to maximizing and utilizing the sustainable protein sources. But what I want to show you here is spirulina. I know that it's not directly related to agriculture. I actually perform other research with plant protein, but to show you the comprehensive information on how to maximize a sustainable protein source, I think it's easier to use spirulina protein. Or in simple way, I have more data or comprehensive information on spirulina as protein source. So as I mentioned before, spirulina is a source of protein, very sustainable. They grow very rapidly, so you get your protein high amount of protein in a very short time. You don't require a wide area to grow the spirulina. And spirulina is called superfood because you have protein, lipids, and bioactive compound. And we actually, in my case, I collaborate with my colleagues from IPB University. Is it correct? Someone from IPB? No? Yeah, I think they are now called IPB University, right? IPB University, and I also collaborate with my colleague from Pajajaran University. So with biorefinery approach, we try to produce different types of food ingredients from spirulina. And me myself, I deal with the protein. And my colleague from IPB University, they deal with the carbohydrate of spirulina because even the carbohydrate of spirulina, it has bioactivity. So it has some antimicroorganism activity. It also can be used as prebiotic. It can prevent inflammation and so on. So the carbohydrate of spirulina has a good bioactivity. And my colleague from Pajajaran, he works with the bioactive compound. So he extracts the bioactive compound, carotene, chlorophyll from spirulina to be used as functional food or colorant. So we will produce natural coloring agent from spirulina. So this is some of the research that we have performed in the lab. Spirulina, as I mentioned before, have problem with odor, right? So we train some panelists, and using QDA, we are able to know the characteristic of the spirulina, the biomass one. So you get spirulina and then you harvest it, you dry it. They mentioned that from the sensory analysis, spirulina biomass has musty, sulfuric, and marine odor. And then we perform deodorization. Deodorization is a process to reduce the odor of the spirulina, to remove the fishy and sulfuric odor of spirulina. The deodorization that we perform, we use ultrasound. Why we use ultrasound? Because using a conventional one, you need a high amount of solvent. You need ethanol, and the process to remove or to reduce the odor actually takes hours, very long. But using ultrasound, you only need maximum 30 minutes for the reduction of odor in spirulina. And we perform, again, a sensory analysis. We perform identification of the volatile organic compound. We perform also sensory analysis with trained panelists. And we are able to report that there is reduction almost 50% of the concentration of the volatile organic compound in spirulina. And the intensity of this musty sulfuric marine, they also decreased by 50%. So we were able to get powder of spirulina with less musty, fishy aroma, and then we try to incorporate it in different types of product. We try in bread, and then in vegan, it's not very clear, yeah? It's vegan and gluten-free cookies. We put it in vegan cheese. We put it as well in, I don't remember the other one, high protein drink. So for these 4 products, normally in the previous research, you can only incorporate 1 to 3% of spirulina biomass. But using the deodorized spirulina biomass, you can increase the addition of your spirulina up to 50 to 20%. So there's high improvement in the concentration that can be put in the food. However, as you see, the color, it's bread, yeah. It's very green, dark green. So the higher the concentration that you put, the darker the color of your food. But for cookies, it's still quite okay. Still light green, right? And for the cheese, it's a bit different with cookies and bread, because cookies and bread, you have other ingredients that can also help masking the odor. But for cheese, it's a bit different. We were able only to incorporate 2% of deodorized spirulina. But in the market, the commercially available one, they can only put less than 1% of the spirulina biomass. And all these products that we incorporate deodorized spirulina biomass, they have much higher protein content and also much higher antioxidant activity. So it can actually improve the health benefit of your food product. We also try to create meat analog from the deodorized spirulina protein. You see, normally the meat analog one is made with soybean protein, but somehow we managed to create a meat analog from deodorized spirulina protein. And you see that maybe it's not very clear because it's far, but it has good layer just like chicken. And the texture is actually quite similar to chicken. And because of this color, we did a special, not a special, it's simple way. We try to cover it, we put some butter in it to cover the green color, and then we fried it, and then we make it into nugget-like products. And actually, by performing sensory analysis, we know that the acceptability of this product is actually okay. It's actually good because by using the deodorized spirulina and also using some ingredients for this product, you will not taste a very strong sulfuric or fishy aroma or flavor from the spirulina.
Excuse me, Dr. Arima, you have 2 minutes left to
Okay.
presentation. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Before concluding my lecture, I will show you just in a fast pace. We did some extraction also, and then we also perform modification. We perform glycation to modify the spirulina protein. And then we try to apply it in different food product. It also works very well. And then might be interesting one, we use this spirulina as coloring agent. So actually the green color from spirulina coming from chlorophyll, carotene, and phycocyanin. Phycocyanin itself is a protein of spirulina. So the original protein itself already has color. But the dark green color from spirulina actually coming from combination of these three products. And currently we are doing research on its application as coloring agent, for example, in ice cream and in emulsion, because the phycocyanin in a very small amount, you can get this electric blue color. The blue is very, very, very strong. So it's an electric blue, but this phycocyanin is not stable. So we are currently doing some research to stabilize the protein by performing modification. And this is for future application. Protein can be used as a fat analog to replace conventional fat, especially animal fat, as well as can be used as a material for 3D printing. So using protein and oil, you can create a good material for 3D printing application. And protein for packaging. You can also transform protein for food packaging. By creating food packaging from protein, actually research shows that it can extend the shelf life of various type of food products, and it is biodegradable. And sometimes you can also make it edible, right? So it can help you to reduce food waste. So for the future, before I end the session, for the future, we need to think about the scalability of this green and sustainable technique, because mostly they are still in the lab scale. And to upscale these techniques, you need to collaborate with, not only food scientists, but you need to collaborate with someone from engineering, from agriculture, and so on. Because, if it's still in the lab scale, then the yield is very low. If you want to have it mass produced, then you have to perform a pilot scale study, and then afterwards you can, if it's feasible, then you can produce it in a very high amount industrial scale. And also we have to think about the acceptance of the consumer, the issue of ethics, the issue of religion, the issue of clean label food product. So there are different aspects that you have to consider. And lastly, it should be noted that simultaneously achieving sustainable source, you have sustainable source. Sometimes you also want to process it using sustainable technology. That is very hard to achieve that. To achieve both sustainable uh, source, and then sustainable technology, extraction, processing, modification, sometimes it's still very challenging. So what you need to do is compromise, right? Because to have it perfect 100% it's very challenging. So what you need to do is compromising. If you think about the sustainable and green aspect, you still need to compromise. Lastly, I want to thank my research teams. They are working very hard, contributing the data, some of the research that I show in my lecture. They are mostly consist of my undergraduate and also postgraduate students. They work very hard. Okay, that was all my presentation. Thank you. I hope you enjoy my lecture. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, I would be gladly answer your questions. I will return the session to Dr. Ines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima.
Wassalamualaikum
Okay.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sorry.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Arima, for giving such an inspiring presentation. Let's give one more applause, one round of applause to Dr. Arima. Okay, now we will proceed to the Q&A session. If you have any question, please you can raise your hand and I'll call your name. Okay, maybe first from the left side, from Miss Tika, yeah. Okay, you can ask your question, please.
Hello, Miss. Uh, my name is Tika. I'm from University of Gadjah Mada. I'm majoring in biology. And if you're familiar with my supervisor, is Professor Eko Agustionang, is also focusing on microalgae in vitro culture. And for now, I was researching on the micro algae, especially for the astaxanthin compound. And it's so much insightful material. So thank you very much. And I want to ask, how do you consider the extraction method is considered to be green extraction or green method? Do you assess the method using the life cycle assessment or etc.? And how do you consider about it? That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, you can answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Tika, for the questions. It's okay if is it okay if I sit here? Yeah, I actually know your supervisor, Professor Eko. He works a lot with spirulina. I haven't worked directly with him, but I know him. So regarding the green sustainability aspect, so far we haven't performed any life cycle assessment, but we are currently applying for a grant to assess the sustainability, the technological aspect of this extraction method. But not only the extraction method, we also collaborate with our colleague from BRIN, from the National Research Agency of Indonesia. We will also assess the life cycle assessment, perform life cycle assessment on not only microalgae but also seaweed, for example. So it's still in our mind. We already propose a grant about it, and if we succeed, then somewhere this year we will begin that analysis, because I know that it's very important. And for us in food science, we cannot perform it ourselves, because we normally dealing with, some, in my case, I deal with chemistry, biochemistry, and so on. So life cycle assessment is not in our field, so we collaborate with someone from National Research Agency. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima. Is it enough from Dr. Miss Tika?
Enough. Thank you very much, Dr. Arima.
Okay, maybe next question from the onsite. Maybe Mr. Sorry, what's your name? Oh, Mr.
Hello.
Okay.
My name
Please.
is Zigel from De La Salle Araneta University. Thank you so much, Dr. Arima, for your lecture. It's very intriguing. It's very interesting. Especially you mentioned earlier about the use of proteins as a alternative biodegradable food packaging. I wanted to ask what proteins were particularly used, and if it and why should we pursue such a technology if there are other biodegradable technologies that use cellulose or starch as their feedstock for making these biodegradable food packaging?
Thank you for the question. What's your name again? Sorry. Zik.
Zik po.
Zik. Okay. Yeah, a good question. So protein as food packaging. I involved in the research that are currently performed by my colleague. They are making biodegradable food packaging, also edible coating from protein, and mostly the protein that they use is gelatin. Yes, gelatin. You know, right? It's proteins from. You can get it from cows or from fish, right? So by using these gelatins, you can get a good film. However, you mentioned about cellulose. You have mentioned about starch, right? Normally, this protein cannot work alone. So you need to combine it with other carbohydrate sources, for example, the cellulose or starch, because there is a properties that the protein doesn't have, but can be provided by starch. And there's also properties that the starch doesn't have that can be provided by protein. So they are working complementary. But the problem is how much the protein and how much cellulose or starch that you need, right? And if you can have a good formulation, you can actually get a good film. And in the case of my colleague, they already try to apply it into vegetables and for seafood. However, for vegetable, you have to be careful because gelatin is not vegetarian or vegan friendly, right? Especially if you want to make it as edible coating or edible packaging, then you have to careful about it as well. But I don't remember the name of the protein, but I think it's from legumes. But also one thing that they use is whey protein. But the other protein from legumes, I don't remember the name. But there's also other plant protein that can be used. But the good one, as far as I know, nowadays, it's still gelatin. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima, for Mr. Zik. Okay. Okay, maybe before we continue in the on-site, I will read from the online first. Is
I
it
think
okay?
the lady over there
Oh,
already
okay.
raised her hand.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. I'm
The
sorry,
one
Miss-
behind you, I think. Oh yeah, sorry. Because
This one
yeah,
first. Okay, okay.
she was raising her hand since the beginning.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
So,
Okay.
okay,
Sorry about
yeah,
that, but just a
sorry.
very quick question. I am Clyde from the Philippines, representing Capiz State University, and I'd just like to ask because it was mentioned earlier, with regards to probiotics, especially yogurt. So I was asked, I'm curious because you mentioned earlier that the quality of proteins can affect the quality of food, particularly its physical property. But I would like to ask if protein also particularly affect the viability of microorganisms, particularly in probiotic foods. And would you recommend? Second question is, would you recommend plant-based milk proteins such as mushrooms in probiotic food processing? So something like that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, very nice questions. Yes, the types of the protein actually influence the viability. A lot of research already shown that if you change your protein in the yogurt, then you also have to analyze the viability of your microorganism in your food product. And regarding the plant protein that can be used for this type of products, I know it's coconut protein is used a lot. However, if you want to make yogurt with coconut protein, because the type of the protein is different with milk protein, the gel that they form is different. So normally the problems is that, for example, if you want to make stir yogurt, they are not viscous enough. And if you just use coconut protein as it is, your yogurt will look like a flock of protein. So it will not, you will not see a continuous smooth texture of yogurt. So in that case, normally if you want to create a vegan yogurt using coconut milk, you sometimes has to add other food hydrocolloids such as carrageenan, alginate, or other types of polysaccharide to help with the smoothness of the texture. So that's one thing. But I also want to see research with pea protein. Yeah, so that's something that can be considered. But if you don't have pea protein in your country, you can actually also explore the local protein that present in your in your place, because like in our department we have a lot of research using local resources. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insightful answer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe before we continue in the on-site participant, I will read one question from the online participants. Okay, it's from Danica from Philippines. The question is there a specific form or type of fiber that significantly reduces the protein absorption? Also, I would just like to add how great that your team was able to remove the fishy smell in spirulina, because I remember someone researching the addition of spirulina in pork sausages and they were having problems with the sensory results due to its smell. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. What was again the first question? Sorry.
Is there a specific form or type of fiber that
Yeah, okay.
significantly reduces the
Okay.
protein absorption?
Yeah, in some of the research, they just mention a total fiber, but I know that fiber has soluble and insoluble fiber, but in general, they prevent the work of enzyme. When you consume your proteins, it somehow prevent the absorption or the contact of the substrate, the protein with the enzyme. So it somehow decrease the digestibility of your protein. However, enzyme also can be used to remove the fiber in the extraction process. You use enzyme that can work with fiber, because there's some enzyme that can work with polysaccharide. A specific enzyme, of course, not protease, but this enzyme can break down the wall material, release the fiber, and remove the fiber, because you break them down, and then you can release the protein from the matrix. So the type of fiber itself, it's still general in my as far as I know, in the research they just mention fiber, but you probably it's also a good idea to know the effect of each different soluble and insoluble fiber. But in my opinion, to have optimum result, you should remove the fiber first, so you get a good absorption of your protein. I mean, it's consumed, it digested, and then you have good absorption of the amino acid in your body.
Okay, for Danica, I hope it answers your question.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
I forgot to say thank
Okay.
you for your compliment. Yes, we were not
Okay.
able to remove it 100%, but we are happy to remove it by 50% already, and it's already increased the concentration that we can put in the food product. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima. Okay, now we can continue to the on-site participant. If you have any questions, you can proceed. Okay, Miss Isis. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, doctor. First of all, my name is Sophia, and
Oh, Sophia,
from
sorry.
University Putra, Malaysia. And I have simple and general question. Where in Southeast Asia, food like sausages and the meatballs are very common and affordable. However, they are often considered unhealthy due to high salt and then fats and the use of fillers like starch. My question is how sustainable proteins processing improve their nutritional quality while still keeping them affordable and widely accepted by the consumer?
Okay. Thank you for the questions. Yes, sausage and meatball, sausage especially has high amount of sodium, and the salt or sodium that we add into sausage actually, the function is not only to give a salty or good flavor of the sausage, but the salt itself has a function. It can solubilize your meat protein. Why do you need to solubilize your meat protein? Because to get those good texture, in the process of making sausage, you mince your meat, right? When you are mincing your meat, you put salt. The salt helps to dissolve the protein, to release the protein from the matrix of the meat. And then when you are heating the sausage butter, actually the soluble protein that you get from the meat create a very strong matrix, which provide you with a good texture of sausage. That's why for sausage, beef burgers, meatballs, if you want to create a healthier product, for example, by reducing the amount of salt, you have to be careful with the texture of your product, right? Because reducing the salt might means that you are reducing the amount of the soluble protein from your meat, which can decrease the texture quality of your sausage, your meatball, and beef patty. And what I can suggest, if you want to reduce the amount of the salt, because meat protein itself, it has good solubility with salt. So you need a specific amount of salt to soluble those protein, the animal protein. So if you want to reduce the salt, in my opinion, you can replace some of the protein with some alternative proteins. For example, soybean protein, the easiest one, or other types of vegetable protein that can soluble in water only. So that means you are reducing the amount of your meat protein, and then you reduce the amount of your salt, but you still need something to create the texture, the juicy and elastic texture, and that you can provide it by applying, for example, soybean protein. Soybean protein is the easiest one because it has very good water holding capacity. To get those juicy texture, you need to have protein that has good water holding capacity. Or you can use whey protein, but whey protein is quite expensive, so you can use an alternative like soybean or other legumes protein. That one thing to note is that those protein has to be highly soluble in water, right? So you want, because you want to reduce your salt, right? So if you still use protein that can soluble only in the presence of salt, then it's no use. So just something that can highly soluble in water, so that's you can reduce the amount of salt in your sausage. And second thing about the high fat content, saturated, especially the saturated fat content, cholesterol, and so on. What I also do in the lab together with my research team, we actually create a sausage without an animal fat. So we make sausage, we formulate sausage with just the lean meat, the part that has very low amount of fat, right? If you buy meat, you can choose, right? The meat that has high content of fat, but also you have the lean meat that has very low content of fat. So we use that part of meat, and then we replace, because normally if you make sausage, you need fat, either from beef or from other source. We replace it with a good source of fat. We use at the time we use sunflower oil, we use soybean oil, right? And then this soybean oil and sunflower oil, it has good profile of fatty acid. It has high content of unsaturated fatty acid, but you cannot just put it like that in your sausage. You need to convert it first into a semi-solid state, because animal fat is semi-solid. And if you just put it like that, it will just go when you are cooking your sausage. It will just release or escape from the matrix. So what we do, we create an emulsion with this oil using protein. We use soybean proteins. We also try to use spirulina protein as well. And we put it into the meat. We create a sausage butter. And the other one, we also create beef patties. I think I have it also in the slides. And it actually works perfectly to replace the animal fat in sausage and beef patties, actually. So you improve the health profile of your product by increasing the amount of protein, and also improving the lipid profile of your food product, because you remove the animal fat and then you replace it with fat that has a good fatty acid profile, like sunflower or soybean oil. But remember, you cannot just put it right away in your sausage butter, because then otherwise they are all gone during your processing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima.
Doctor.
Is it enough for Miss?
Yeah.
Okay.
it's very-
Okay, maybe next question from the on-site participant. Okay, please, you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Arima. Thank you for the very interesting topic on green technology for food processing. I just would like to point out on the last few slides about as a colorant, because I have a project also in our university. By the way, I'm Dom from Central Mindanao University in the Philippines. So it catched my attention about as a colorant. May I ask, in your experiment, if there has been a problem on the retention of the color a long way during the storage? And if yes, what can we do to solve it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. For the chlorophyll, because the color that I show in the slide, there are three sources: chlorophyll, carotenes, and also phycocyanin. Phycocyanin is the dominant protein that present in spirulina. Phycocyanin has a very good color. It can really give you bright blue color in a very small amount of phycocyanin. But as you mentioned, it is actually very labile. The color retention is a problem. If you expose it to heat or a pH that doesn't suit with the phycocyanin, you might lose the color. So what we are currently doing, because phycocyanin is actually a protein, so we are currently doing modification of this phycocyanin by performing glycation. So we link this phycocyanin to polysaccharide. So in theory, it can help to improve the color retention of the phycocyanin. And by the way, my researcher is here. She's currently doing this research in stabilizing phycocyanin so that it can retain the color over a long period of time. Also, it can stable at various temperature because phycocyanin as a protein itself, it's very heat labile. It's degrade easily, but the color is actually super nice. So what we are doing now, actually, since it is very heat labile, we are currently trying to apply it in whipped cream. So whipped cream, you don't need a high temperature, and the pH is still okay for phycocyanin. So for the moment, it is good to be applied in whipped cream. But if you want to put it in beverage or cookies, bread, or so on, then you still need to stabilize the protein, the phycocyanin, by doing modification.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arima. And maybe the application could be used mostly for cold products.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
But also the cold product itself, there's still issue on the long-term stability. So like if you have a bakery, you create, this decorative cake, you have, for example, birthday cake, you put your whipped cream with blue color and so on. Normally the product only lasts for like 2 days, let's say, or 3 days. I don't know how long it will normally stay in the bakery, in the, apa namanya itu? In the display, thank you. In display, for that type of product, it's okay because you don't need to store it very long time. But if you need to store it monthly, then you still need to do something to stabilize. Also, in other research, actually, I saw that the application or adding sugar, high amount of sugar, can help to retain the color of the phycocyanin, actually. Yeah.
Although I'm not yet done also with my research on beetroot. Maybe I could give you also an exchange of informations. Like we do also oxidation tests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima. Is there any more question? Okay, can you please ask your question?
Working, is it working now? Okay. I'm Claire from Charles Sturt in Australia. You did briefly touch on it earlier, when Zeke, I think, proposed like using protein as an alternative packaging. And you mentioned like combining it with other carbohydrate sources. Have you looked into, like, I know that there are some research and innovations with using like seaweed as an alternative packaging because it has the carbohydrates as well. Has your research gone into using seaweed as an option?
Unfortunately, up to now, I haven't tried to use carbohydrate that is extracted from seaweed, but maybe it's not right away. But from seaweed you can get alginate, different types. You have different types of seaweed, right? You can get alginate, carrageenan, and so on. In some research, I know they use it, but I myself haven't tried to incorporate this seaweed derivative carbohydrate that you obtain from seaweed. But it is possible, I think. But in my other research, in which I involve as a part of the team member, they use pectin, and then they combine it with other protein. And what I saw in this research, the properties that is provided by pectin, actually you can get it from either carrageenan or alginate, but probably you will have to check the strength of your film, because as you know, pectin, alginate, carrageenan, they have different molecular weight. They might interact differently with protein. It is possible, but probably you have to make sure that your film is strong enough as a packaging, because otherwise then the application, it will be hard if you don't have strong enough material or a film, but it is possible. You can extract I don't know what type of seaweed that you use. Not yet. Not yet, yeah. But you can explore. You can get alginate, you can get protein. There are different types of carbohydrate that you can extract from seaweed. But it is possible. It is possible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima. Is it enough from Claire? Okay. Maybe from the on-site, is there any more questions? Okay. Okay, please, you can ask a question.
Good afternoon, doctor. I'm Kenneth from the LSAU in the Philippines. My question is that is it possible to grow lab-grown tofus, since I was intrigued with lab-grown meats in other countries such as Singapore. I think Singapore is the leading lab-grown meat distributor. So, is it possible for us to grow lab-grown tofus, even though it's much better to process it commercially from soybeans itself, but for research purposes, it may be beneficial for us to learn if there are ways to grow tofu-based proteins.
Thank you for the questions. So far I don't have any experience yet with lab-grown meat, but I remember last time we had a meeting with a company from the South Korea. They want to create a collaboration, and I remember they mentioned that using precision fermentation, you can grow any type of protein. That means it's possible to grow. Tofu is like soybean protein, right? But you can also create tofu from other types of protein, actually, not only soybean. But probably that means it's possible. I'm not sure. But they mentioned at the time that any type of protein can be produced using that techniques. However, because it's soybean protein, you have also to think about the cost, because as I remember, the lab-grown meat, it is sustainable, green. They mentioned about it. The yield is very high, but one paper also reported that actually the cost is quite high because the energy consumption is high. So you have to think about this aspect. Which one is more beneficial? Which one provide you more profit? More money. If you want to provide it, or if you want to produce it in a very big amount, of course you are thinking about profit, right? So you can perform like assessment, the feasibility assessment, whether it is profitable producing the protein, the tofu, using lab-grown technology, or making it directly from soybean. Yeah, maybe I can answer only that.
Yes, you've answered my question. It was just so that to be clarified, it's not for consumer based, but it's for research purposes only. So maybe if we can improve that technology, we can use that to further develop other techniques to grow proteins and such.
Yeah, it's possible, I think, yeah. Based on what they mentioned, even though we were only still in the initial discussion at the time, but they already mentioned that it's possible and type of protein they can produce it. But I also don't know specifically how you will do that. But what I know is only limited to the meat protein. But I think if it's possible, then it would be very interesting, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima. Is it okay? You know?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Arima, maybe last question from the online participants. I will read it for you. It is from Tereshinha from Timor-Leste. Thank you, Dr. Arima. I was very interested in your presentation. You explained the use of spirulina. Why using 3% spirulina in bread is better than 3% and 7% spirulina in bread? What is the purpose of using spirulina in bread?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Very good question. So we actually that research is it's from our previous study. So we collaborate with a company that produce spirulina biomass, and at that time we were still not thinking about deodorization or reduce the odor of spirulina. So they want to create a product and increase the protein content of those product by adding spirulina. And the product that they mentioned at the time was bread. So we make white loaf bread and then we add spirulina. And using the native, the spirulina biomass, the one that has not yet been deodorized, we can only incorporate the spirulina in those range of concentration, 3%, 5%, and 7%. And the one that is accepted by consumer, by the panelists, is only the 3% one, because using 5% and 7%, the bread becomes harder, and somehow there is this fishy and musty sulfuric aroma in the bread. That is the case. But then after that, we were thinking about on how we can increase the amount of the protein, because 3% is still limited and the increase of the protein content in the bread is not significant. So we want to get more spirulina in the bread. That's why we are then perform research on deodorization of the spirulina, and it works well actually, despite its color, very dark green color. But we were able to incorporate up to 15, if I'm not mistaken, or 20% of the spirulina, so much higher than the previous one. And the texture itself, it's already better. It's softer because we also modify the technique in making the bread itself, because somehow increasing the amount of the protein, it's affecting the texture of your bread. It's become a very hard and not soft anymore.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arima. I hope it is clear enough for the person who asked the questions. Okay, because of the limited time, maybe I will end the session with Dr. Arima. But before we end the session, maybe I will highlight some notes from this session. Okay, like Dr. Arima already mentioned several types of protein, including the promising future protein ones. And also Dr. Arima highlight the spirulina research, yeah, from including the extraction of spirulina and the application in various products. Okay, once again, thank you, Dr. Arima, for your time and insightful presentation. And also thank you for all the participants. Please give a last big applause to Dr. Arima. Okay, Dr. Arima, is there any final words from you to all of the participants, maybe?
Enjoy the rest of your stay in Jogja and don't forget to travel to explore Jogja.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh yeah. Tomorrow we're going to field trip, so maybe we can explore as well. Okay, thank you very much. I will turn the session to the Masters of Ceremony.
Thank you so much to Dr. Arima Dia Satyawati for being an insightful lecturer about sustainable food processing and green technology. We would like to give the appreciation certificate that will be given, symbolized by our moderator. And also, we would like to thank Dr. Ina Santi Pandanwangi, who led the discussion before, and the certificate of appreciation will be given by the Vice Chairman of Short Course 2026, Ms. Taliana Ziha, MSc MBA. With the session of appreciation certificate already implemented, then the fourth material of this summer course has ended. For operators, you may